Good evening, everyone. My name is James Lombella, and I'm the CEO, President for Connecticut for Animals Education Fund. Thanks for joining us this evening for our CFA educational webinar, The Effects of Neonicotinoids, Pesticides on Our Pollinators, Insects, Animals, and Ecosystem, and How You Can Help. What we're going to cover today, first, I want to start off by thanking the Community Foundation of Eastern Connecticut, which are our sponsors for our educational event this evening. I also want to have a couple slides and spend a few minutes introducing CT for Animals Education Fund. And I also want to spend a few minutes on how to get involved. Our number one question people ask us is how can we get involved and how can we make a difference? And then we'll roll right into our guest speaker presentation. As time permits in the end, we will have a wrap up and question and answers and a few housekeeping tips and things I ask everyone to do. Please mute your microphone if it was not auto muted when you joined this evening. The webinar is being recorded and will be available on our CFA YouTube channel to review and share. And we will also send a link out once we have it available and uploaded. We do ask that you use the question and answer button to load any questions, and we will review if time permits at the end. And also, the one ask I do have is please share the education that you learned today with your family, your friends, your neighbors. Pass it along for the animals. Education is a very powerful tool to use, and I ask everyone to share what you learned this evening. We're going to go ahead and get started. CFA Vision, Connecticut for Animals Education Fund strives to cultivate a compassionate society where animals are valued and their rights are respected, fostering a culture of empathy and responsibility towards all living beings. Please check out our brand new website, ctforanimals.org, and you're going to find out how we empower, how we engage, how we educate, and how we collaborate at Connecticut for Animals Education Fund. How you can get involved. The number one question we have, all of us coming together for animals. When you go to our website, you'll see several different sections. You'll see an advocacy section, an education, engagement, partnerships. You'll also find our previous and past newsletters, our upcoming events, and how you can support our work as well. So please check out our brand new website, www.ctforanimals.org. You'll also find a full section and library of fact sheets that we are compiling, and that's growing on a daily basis. There's a toolkit, there's links to many educational videos, also a review of important laws. We do have a blog section, and we do have articles and links as well, all education-based and educational materials for the animals. Events, you'll find we're out in the community at multiple different events. If you want to volunteer and get involved, we have a full section on how to join our team and volunteer to help educate residents on issues facing animals here in Connecticut, how we work together, and you can join CFA to make sure you get our latest newsletter and all of the information and education going on across the state. I also want to take a minute to review the General Assembly website, cga.ct.gov. It's very important that as residents here in Connecticut, you understand where all the legislation is, how to be able to access it, and most importantly, how to find your state legislators and your elected representatives. It's as easy as picking up your phone and typing into the web browser, the cga.ct.gov. Type your town you live in, type your name, your house number, your street, and click find. And you're going to see the top two rows are your legislators. You'll find your state representative, you'll find your U.S. senators, Congress person as well. It's very important to know who your legislators, who your elected officials are. Reach out to them, have a cup of coffee with them, and let them know where you stand on legislative topics that impact our animals across the state of Connecticut. With that, I'm going to jump right in this evening to take and introduce our guest expert, Louise Washer. We're very fortunate to have Louise with us this evening. She's a founder and member of the executive board of the Pollinator Pathways. She also serves as a facilitator of the Pollinator Pathways Advocacy and Pesticide Policy Committee, which worked to help pass the Birds and Bees Protection Act in New York last year. And she's also working to pass a ban on the use of neonicotinoid pesticides and pesticide-coated seeds here in Connecticut. Louise is an organizer of Connecticut Pesticide Reform, the acronym is CPR, a coalition of concerned individuals and conservation organizations working to reform pesticide policy in Connecticut. She also serves as president of the Norwalk River Watershed Association, and she's on the board of the Hudson to Housatonic Regional Conservation Partnership. Tonight, Louise is going to talk about the effects of neonicotinoids, pesticides on your pollinators, insects, animals, and ecosystems, and how you can help, how each one of us can impact our own ecosystems here in our yard and how they contribute to the larger ecosystems overall. I was very fortunate to be able to review the information. I was putting the presentation together, and I told you I'm very excited. This information is what you can put to use. I learned things I can do right here in my own yard that impact pollinators and the whole insect population as well. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Louise Washer. Welcome, Louise. And I hand the presentation over to you as our guest expert presenter this evening. Everyone, Louise Washer.
Thank you very much for having me here tonight. And I want to, I am a part of all these groups, but one of the threads that ties them together is my concern and my passion about doing something about pesticides in Connecticut. I started out working for the local watershed association, which I still am president of, and being concerned about, pesticides in our waterways. And then friends of mine were coming together to try to start to create the pollinator pathway. And that opened a door to me, about what was happening with the pollinators. I had not been focused on that. And this was in 2017, which was an important time. That was when this big German study came out that, I don't know if you guys remember, the New York Times Magazine had the insect apocalypse on the cover. And this German study was really important because of how rigorous it was, and because it was the study of all flying insects over such a long period of time in all these different open spaces. And it really raised the alarm bells for kind of the world about the declines in insects. We are all also used to seeing the monarch population being down 90% in the last 20 years, the critical loss of many of our bumblebee species in Connecticut. The rusty patch bumblebee used to be very common, and now it has been put on the endangered species list. And there are many more that are waiting to hopefully get that status. The honeybees get a lot of attention, the colony collapse and all that. So that issue joined with my water quality concerns, and I really started focusing on, what we can do about it. But before I dive into the pesticides, I wanted to just talk a little bit about, why are we seeing there are a lot of reasons we're seeing declines in insects and pollinators. One is the loss and fragmentation of habitat. So if you look at this picture on the left of the houses, we're carving up the landscape. East of the Mississippi River, 86% of property is privately owned. So we are creating spaces that just aren't hospitable to wildlife and to insects and pollinators. We either have a lack of all plants and just a monoculture of lawn. Lots of invasive plants are nudging out the native plants that wildlife need. And climate change is also a problem, messing up the synchronization between, say, the bloom of certain flowers and trees and the emergence of the butterflies that need them, that kind of thing. Is happening. Light pollution is a big problem, especially for moths. So, using a motion sensor light for outdoor lighting makes a huge difference in moth populations. And moths are incredible pollinators, incredibly active, important pollinators that for the most part, we don't think as much about. And then the other reason is pesticides and lawn chemicals, which is what we're going to be talking about tonight. And I have the birds here because pollinators are important to us. They, without them, we don't have a third of our food and we don't have 80% of blooming plants outside, but they are also the bottom of the food chain. So without them, one of the first things we're seeing is, I don't know, this works better when we're all in the same room, but I don't know if you guys know out there, what percentage of all terrestrial birds eat insects. And, this is something I had no idea, but it's 96%. So when we're losing the insects, we're also this is a part of the story of the loss of 3 billion birds in the last 50 years. So if you look at like where bird declines have happened, it's the insect eating birds that are down. In fact, the species that don't eat insects, that don't need insects, is actually even up a little bit. So one example that's very famous through Doug Ptolemy's work, that you guys might be familiar with, there was a grad student who followed a nest of chickadees. I think it was in like Philadelphia or somewhere in a city, to see, how many caterpillars did this mother and father chickadee need to bring back to for their babies, because it's very important for baby birds to have caterpillars. They're soft and full of protein, and they really need them. And it turns out it's 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars. So when we're losing our pollinators, we're also really putting pressure on all other wildlife species, birds, and, up the food chain. So that's sort of the bad news. The good news is, what can I do in my own yard to help? And the good news is that it is a lot. This is a map that I always like to show that shows how much lawn we have in this country. Lawn, we have over 40 million acres of lawn. It is alone our biggest crop, irrigated crop. So we need to kind of question, how we're doing the lawn culture thing. And so I'm going to talk more about that. Adding native plants to your yard is a way to help pollinators, absolutely, and avoiding pesticides. So just briefly, why are lawns a problem? You see this America's killer lawn. There's a lot in the press about it, but I didn't really understand it until, well, this illustration here helped me understand it the first time I saw it. One problem is lawns are a monoculture. So there's no diversity of plants there. There's nothing for wildlife to eat. There's no place to nest, obviously. But they also, because they're not native, most turf grasses are not native, they need a lot of care. They need a lot of water, and people put a lot of fertilizer on them and put a lot of herbicides on them to make sure that they only have one type of grass and not, clover and other things in there. And all of those toxins end up really washing into our streams. Another problem is that their root systems, that's what this picture, this biggest picture shows. If you look on the left, the root system of grass is just extremely shallow. So if you look at the wildflowers to the right, you'll see that their root systems go down, and they're better at catching the runoff, stormwater runoff from like our driveways and our roofs and stuff. And across our lawns that are carrying all the pesticides, those plants will be able to stop that water flow and have it trickle through the ground and get sort of filtered out. So there are a lot of reasons that lawns are particularly challenging for environmental health. The other thing is that we put so much water on them. They use 9 billion gallons of water per day, according to the EPA, on lawns in this country. So we here in Connecticut had a very wet last couple of years, but we have had serious droughts before that. 2012 to 2017, we had that long drought, and just seeing people watering their lawns, very frustrating to me, because I'm worried about the rivers and the water coming out of them to go on people's lawns. So anyway, this is my roundup, rethink your lawn slide. The things that you can do: mow less frequently, every couple of weeks, every 3 weeks, reduce the size of your lawn by adding shrubs and trees. I mean, if you are ambitious, you can put in pollinator garden, which is great, but just honestly adding native shrubs and trees along the edges of your yard makes a big difference. You can let part of your yard go natural, create like a mini meadow. That's how I've done it. I've put some more wild and natural little mini meadows in areas that used to be lawn. And it's always a good idea to test your soil to see if any fertilizer, chemical fertilizer, is never a good idea. But if you do need something to amend your soil, you can get an organic fertilizer. And just avoiding pesticides is a good idea. So the message of the pollinator pathway is really simple. What we can do: rethink our lawn, plant native plants, and avoid pesticides. And I'm going to really focus now on the pesticide part. and start with just like the question, what is a pesticide? It's an umbrella term that includes insecticides, herbicides, fungicides, rodenticides, all of those sides. Um, it's anything really that's designed to kill something we don't want. So crabgrass or grubs in our lawn or ticks or mosquitoes, harmful things that we need to kill. And 88 million households use them, herbicides being the largest category. So if you are thinking about, planting those native plants for pollinators and trying to join the pollinator pathway or just bring more butterflies and birds to your yard and have your yard be an oasis for them. Planting those things and then spraying is a particular problem because you're drawing them to your yard and creating sort of an ecological trap. This guy spraying is next door to me, next door to my house. And this pesticide sign, I was riding my bike by that day and saw that they had just sprayed, and then they had this catmint blooming that was just completely covered in bumblebees. So I thought it was a good example of the problem with that. It's really important to avoid ground soaking. So if you are going to treat a tree or something with a pesticide because of its illness or something, even if you're trying to do a good thing like treat a tree, a lot of that is done with ground soaking. And it's really important to know that 70% of our native bees are ground nesters. They're solitary bees that nest in the ground. Most of them don't sting. And if you aren't aware of that, I mean, I never noticed a ground nesting bee until I like looked at some pictures like this of this little guy coming out. And now whenever I see a spot in my yard where they are, I'm like, oh my God, I have these native wild bees and I need to, be careful. So that's just something to recognize. It's not a great idea to do ground soaking pesticides because of that. And then the other 30% of our native bees are cavity nesters. There are, I think, around 380 species of native bees in Connecticut. A lot of time when people think about bees, they think about honeybees, which are really important for producing honey and for farmers to use to move around to pollinate orchards and things, but they are from Europe. They're not native to North America. So a lot of attention gets paid to honeybees, and that's great. But most people don't even recognize that we have this amazing, beautiful diversity of native bees in our state that we need to be aware of and protect. So the other 30% are cavity nesting bees. So they need, like when you're trimming your hydrangea, they need you to leave a couple of feet, like 18 inches of stalk, because they go down in the hole in that stalk, and that's where they lay the eggs, put a little seal, lay another egg, put a little seal. So it's important to leave some of those stalks. So that's a little bit of a tangent. I'm weaving in what you can do in your yard around the pesticide message. But what are pesticides made of? I did not realize a lot of them are made from oil and gas. That includes neonicotinoids that we're going to talk about, pyrethroids that we'll touch on, and glyphosate, which is what is in Roundup that we'll also talk about in a minute. Many of these poisons were created as weapons during World War II. And then after the war, the chemical companies were like, we have all these things, like, what are we going to do with them? And they started to think about using them on lawns to really create the monoculture that we now kind of take for granted. In the 1950s, when you bought grass seed, a lot of time it came with clover seed in it. But then we sort of decided, no, we don't want clover. This picture on the right is at the Vatican, and that is a lawn at the Vatican that is all clover. So I like to put that in there. Another thing that struck me, I mean, I guess I always just thought, take for granted, if something is for sale, it must be safe. Our system has in place guardrails that will keep very unsafe products off the market. But it's not the case with pesticides. Some of the reasons are that pesticides are tested primarily by their own manufacturer, which obviously has a bias. Their tests are done only on the active ingredient. So if you look at this label here, you can see the active ingredients, and then you can see, the other ingredients, which is 99.92%. So they only test the one active ingredient and not in formulation with the inactive ingredients or other ingredients. Like, for example, in Roundup that we're all kind of familiar with, the surfactant, which is uh the I don't know what soap is like a surfactant. That's like a natural one that you can use, but it makes the pesticide stick to the leaf. So the surfactant that was added to Roundup was actually found to harm human health on its own. So aside from the active ingredients, sometimes these other ingredients are also harmful. Um, tests the tests that are done for safety are done on a limited population. Like obviously they're not tested on children or people with existing health issues, more vulnerable people in our population. There's no testing done on combinations of pesticides. So if you think about, people that use a couple of different pesticides in their yard, we don't know what those combinations are doing. And in the US, we allow the use of a lot of pesticides that are banned in other countries, including the neonicotinoids that we're going to talk about. So what you can do here is just be informed, just like own this, just if you're using something or you have a lawn service and they're coming in and they're going to use a product, ask to see the label and find out what the active ingredient is, and either just Google it, or the best thing is to go to the Beyond Pesticides or the Pesticide Action Network websites and find out, what is this chemical? Is it harmful to pollinators, birds, other wildlife? Some organic pesticides are actually harmful to pollinators or somewhat harmful to pollinators. So it's important to look up everything. There's lots of places you can do your homework, pollinatorpathway.org, Xerxes Society, as well as Beyond Pesticides. And then I'm going to talk about a couple of specific pesticide products that I think it's especially important to be aware of. The weed and feed combination is particularly problematic. It is a mixture of what it says. It's a mixture of fertilizer and also weed killer. So because you want the fertilizer to go all over your yard, you're necessarily spreading this herbicide all over your yard, whether or not there are any weeds there. So it's a prophylactic use of the herbicide, and it's an unnecessary use for probably most of your yard. So that tends to put more of it in the environment than could even be, than you would even want, even if you were happy to use the active ingredient in this, which is 2,4-D, which is known to threaten human health and is especially dangerous to children. A part of 2,4-D was part of Agent Orange that they used in Vietnam. So it's a very serious pesticide. Dogs have been shown to be twice as likely to develop lymphoma when they're exposed to it on lawns. Birds and pollinators are affected. And studies by the U.S. Geological Survey show that 2,4-D is the #1 herbicide that's detected in streams and even in our groundwater. So its overuse is really a problem. The other problem is that it can damage lawns by harming sort of the natural mix of living microorganisms that are in soil and beneficial insects and earthworms and things that are in your soil that actually help you maintain a healthy and beautiful, turf grass. So lots of reasons to avoid that. Glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in Roundup. Most of us know this, really omnipresent. Like this is just the Lowe's near me. I just took a picture of just a huge shelf of Roundup. It's used in agriculture. It's particularly been harmful to the monarch butterfly and other pollinators because of the invention of GMO crops that are resistant to Roundup. So you can spray Roundup all over your wheat field or your corn field or your soybean field, and your plants will be fine, but all of the edge, milkweed and goldenrod and other plants, native weeds that the butterflies need, will be wiped out. So glyphosate is a big reason we've had the decrease in the number of pollinators for that reason, and especially monarchs who are migrating and need the milkweed on the edges of fields to make their journey. More than 250 million pounds of glyphosate are sprayed on American crops. So that's that story. But also other products besides Roundup can have glyphosate. So it's important to read the labels on that. I'll just kind of go through this quickly. I think we all read that Roundup was people were suing because they had cancer cause linked to the use of Roundup. And that led to, I mean, it has other effects too on people, but its main thing was the suits, I think, were mainly over the cancer. And so Bayer in 2020, they committed to a $10 billion settlement, and they announced that they were going to withdraw Roundup from the shelves. So it seems this year that what they've done is they have some different formulas of Roundup. We are still kind of doing our homework on this, but it seems like they do still use glyphosate for licensed pesticide applicators, like lawn service could still use that formula. But for the formulas that you might buy in in Lowe's or in your hardware store, they've changed. I think they have 3 or 4 new formulas, and they have just put in other active ingredients. I know one that was in the store near me is triclopyr, which is another very strong, very compromising pesticide that moves easily through water into streams. So it's still important to read the label and look up what's there. Now we don't know exactly what is going to be in these new formulas of Roundup yet. So got to do the homework on that. So the problems with glyphosate are not just on humans, but they have some of the same effects on pollinators. They're been shown to disrupt the sort of microbiomes of the bees, and to harm them that way. They deprive plants in the ground. They sort of like bind to minerals and then keep the plants from being able to take them up. So a lot of negatives for just the health of your yard and the health of the insects that are there. It commonly shows up in groundwater and surface water, and even in some marine environments. And the thing about it, and I just think this is interesting. So it's terrible, but some of the impairments to bumblebees have been shown to be around the thermoregulation that bumblebees do. Bumblebees are really sensitive to temperature, and when they're ground nesters, they have small they'll take like an old mouse hole and lay their eggs down in there. So they don't have big colonies, very small colonies, but they're in the ground. And if it's too hot down there, they have a way of like using their wings to cool their surroundings. And if it's too cold, they can like shiver. They have these like the muscles, I think, on their sides that move their wings, they can use to create heat. And one of the things that Roundup does is get in the way of that thermoregulation. So many amazing things about the bees. So the third and last pesticide that I'm going to talk about individually are the neonicotinoids. And this is the thing that has really taken over my life, working on trying to restrict these in Connecticut. They're the most widely used insecticides in the world. They're being called the new DDT. If you remember DDT from when I was growing up, was wiping out all the birds. And this is a similar situation. Neonicotinoids, or neonics for short, have been linked to sharp declines in bee and other insect population. Sorry. The decline in the bees has just been very much since the 1990s, when these pesticides started being used so heavily. And there are hundreds of studies connecting the two things. So Cornell in 2018 released a report that looked at over 1,000 studies that showed that those links, and other points that I'm going to talk about as well in that study. Neonics are 7,000 times as toxic to insects as DDT, And one thing that came out of that Cornell study is that US agriculture has been made 48 times more harmful to insects since the 1990s, since the beginning of the widespread use of neonics. They're so strong that 1 square foot of a lawn treated with neonics at the EPA approved levels has enough toxin to kill 1 million bees. So that's how they can be having such a dramatic effect on our pollinator populations. They are just so good at killing insects. The US Geological Survey tests surface waters across the country for pesticides, luckily. So we have some data on the presence of neonics, and the USGS found that half of all US streams have neonics in them. We know that in Connecticut, I'm going to talk in a little bit about what we know about Connecticut waters, but that includes Connecticut, that our Connecticut rivers have neonics in them. So the neonics in the rivers are killing, or they are at levels that can be lethal to the bugs that live in the river, the aquatic insects. So that's something that we're seeing in Connecticut that I'm going to say more about, is that these pesticides are there at levels that are really wiping out that bottom of the food chain in our freshwater aquatic system. So if you don't have those caddisflies, mayflies, like fly fishermen are familiar with the names of these bugs that are in our rivers, but they're the food for everything, the fish, the frogs, the birds, the turtles. Everybody needs those bugs. And I talked already about the decline in birds, also linked to these losses of aquatic insects and caterpillars and stuff. And the EPA has not acted on this issue in a way that is very satisfying, but they were sued a few years ago by the Center for Biological Diversity, and they were forced to do a study on the effect of neonics on listed species, so threatened and endangered species. And the result of that study, EPA study, was that neonics are likely to jeopardize over 200 listed and threatened species, and that includes some pollinators. So where are they used? And how do we know about them so we can avoid them? They are used largely in Connecticut to kill grubs on lawns and golf courses. And they are also used as a coating on seeds. So we have an estimated 15 to 30,000 acres of golf course. We have a little bit less than that, almost the same amount of agricultural. So we have more lawn and golf course than we have agricultural acres, which is not that surprising, but it means, well, it's really empowering to those of us who have lawns, because we're part of the potential solution to the problem in Connecticut. The coated seed, so the pesticide is sometimes coated onto agricultural seeds. So as, again, like a prophylactic, I think I have so the farmer doesn't know yet, which insects might be there to attack his corn or her corn as it's growing. So they start out with just this seed that's coated with pesticides that will kill anything, whether it's there or not. And the problem with that is, well, it flies in the face of integrated pest management, which is the idea that you use the least toxic chemical to treat a problem that is there. So that's a best management practice that has been really disrupted by the idea that the seeds would come with pesticide already on them. Some other problems with the seeds are that pesticide seed coatings are exempted from government regulation. So a pesticide like neonics, which is regulated, is not regulated if it's on a seed. So that makes no sense. It also means we don't have a lot of data. We don't have any data on how much is used, where, what the consequences of this are. We do know from the chemical industry's own research, or own studies, that the pesticide coating, only 5% of that goes up into the plant, and the other 95% goes through the air, soil, and into our waterways. So neonics, one of the things that makes them so lethal and good at killing insects is that they work systemically. So they are very water soluble. They go up into the plant and they become part of the plant. So the dew on a plant's leaves, the nectar, the pollen that a plant produces has the pesticide in it and it is toxic to insects. So, but for these seed coatings, most of it's just going straight into the water anyway. Um, yeah, and so they're prophylactic. They're used whether there's a pest there or not. And the other really important thing that I don't have as a bullet on this slide, but was really the most important thing, is that there were really rigorous studies done in Canada where neonics, parts of Canada have banned neonics along with Europe. But in Canada, what they found was that the use of these coated seeds was not increasing crop yields for farmers. It was not, they were not saving farmers money by, having their crop yields be so much bigger. And I'm sure that there are some instances where having the coated seed helped because there was an insect that attacked the corn that year. But overall, farmers are not saving money by using these seeds. So that study, the Cornell study, looked at that and also brought in, 1,000 other studies. That data is what helped New York State and now Vermont pass bans on the use of these seeds. And we really, really want Connecticut to follow. So we have Quebec that has banned neonics, and we have New York that's banned almost all neonics, and Vermont as well. So we're seeing this. Maine and New Jersey are also have banned. I'll talk about that later, but oops. I'll talk more about what other states are doing at the end of the talk. But yeah, so it gives me hope that we have a lot of important data that can help us move policy in the right direction. And some of the data that we have is from the U.S. Geological Survey testing Connecticut's rivers. And they've focused on the Norwalk River, which is where I live, and the Connecticut River for more than 20 years, testing monthly. They also, in 2016, tested 16 rivers across Connecticut, and you can see where those tests were on this map. And they found that in 2019, just looking at a snapshot of 1 year, of the 218 pesticides that they looked at, 30 were found in our rivers, and one of those was found at levels that exceed the aquatic life benchmark. So levels that will kill aquatic life, those macroinvertebrate, the little bugs in the river that everything needs to survive. That's why we say that neonicotinoids hollow out whole ecosystems because they're killing the bottom of the food chain. So this is really important data that we have. The Connecticut Pesticide Reform Coalition is working to add to that data to do more testing, which I'll mention at the end as well. This is another, anytime there's data on this, any studies or we find out anything about where pesticides are showing up in our environment, I try to grab it and put it into these talks just to give people examples of what's happening. And this is a story in Darien at Pear Tree Point, which you can see the little red dot on this map. There's a place there, a dock there where people want to park their boats, and every 20 years or so they dredge it out. And they just did in 2022, they went to dredge this area, and they found before they take the dredge out to these big open pits in the middle of the ocean, they have to be tested for toxins to make sure they're not too toxic to go out to the middle of the ocean. And when they tested this dredge in Darien, they found all of these pesticides at levels that were too toxic. So they weren't able to, use that cheaper open pit dumping of their dredged material. But it's also, to me, is interesting to look at this list because there are a lot of pesticides here that were banned 30 years ago. Chlordane, I have my friend and colleague Mary Wilson on tonight to say more about individual pesticides and the chemistry of them if people are interested. But it just shows how long these things stay around in the soil and in the water. So does it matter to human health if there are neonics? In our Yes, the answer is yes, and more. I mean, neonics um, act like nicotine, so their name comes from the fact that they work through the neurological system the way nicotine does. So they're like neonicotinoids. Um, but they were when they were first came up with them, the idea is that they were going to be really, really toxic to insects, but very not harmful to humans. And so that was like the great promise of neonics. But we are finding more and more now that they've, so prevalent in our environment and in our food and in our water that there are more and more studies showing that they do present harms to the heart and brain development in prenatally exposed children, decreased sperm quality and quantity, decreased testosterone was shown, altered insulin regulation, and changes in fat metabolism. Those are some of the effects associated with neonics. And are they in our drinking water? We don't know if there's any data on that in Connecticut. I'm asking the Department of Health right now if they test for neonics. But right now, I don't know the answer to that in Connecticut. We do know Long Island has had problems with other chemicals in their water causing breast cancer. So they're very diligent about testing their water for pesticides. And they found that 30% of the drinking water in Long Island has neonics in it. The USDA found that 63% of food samples collected in the US contain at least one neonic. So again, neonics are systemic. They're in the fruit of the plant. They cannot be washed off. So, we're eating them when we eat plants that are grown from the seeds or have been sprayed with neonics. The CDC found neonics in 50% of the population, with the highest concentrations in children. And a really terrible bad news study out of the University of Illinois showed that of 171 pregnant women, 95% of them had neonics in their body. So if you were on the fence about whether or not you wanted to go with an organic diet, I just think it's so important to eat organically now. Now that I know as much as I do about the pesticides that could be in our food and are in our food, I really try to buy organic produce wherever I can. I talked about this a little bit already. I'm winding up here, but the EPA has not acted on this. I think is overwhelmed by all these different chemicals, and it seems like we can't wait around. I think states are recognizing we can't wait around for the EPA to do something about this while we're losing birds and pollinators and other wildlife, and our waterways are being polluted at such an extreme and like emergency level, really. So New York, I mentioned New York and Vermont. I don't even have on this slide yet because that was just this year, passed important bills banning the coated seeds, and New York banned use on turf grass, so use on lawns and golf courses, which is really important. And Maine, New Jersey, Nevada have also banned non-agricultural uses, so use on turf grass. The European Union years ago banned neonics and parts of Canada as well. So in Connecticut, we should be able to do this. We have been a leader. We were the first state in the country to ban pesticides from playing fields, kindergarten through 8th grade in 2010. We led the way really on neonics in 2016 with the Pollinator Protection Act, which made neonics restricted use, which means you can no longer go into Lowe's and buy neonics to use on your own. They have to be only used by a licensed applicator. So that was an important step. Many, many states have followed. I think 11 states have now made neonics restricted use. In 2022, we had a neonics bill that would have banned their use on lawns and golf courses, and also banned the use of chlorpyrifos on golf courses, which is a really you're not familiar with it, really harmful to the brains of developing brains in children, and just a terrible pesticide. So we ended up passing, and we found out through research, going and digging through boxes in the basement of DEEP, that 80% of the chlorpyrifos used in our state was being used on golf courses. So we were able to use that information to pass that part of the bill. So in 2022, we banned the use of chlorpyrifos on golf courses. But at the last 11th hour, the legislators chopped the neonics part of that bill off. We have a big fight to fight against the chemical industry. I mean, they have billions of dollars and lobbyists who come to Hartford, and there's a big pushback in trying to restrict these pesticides. But out of this work came Connecticut Pesticide Reform and the Pollinator Advisory Committee, which was the group that helped pass the Pollinator Protection Act. So we're moving forward. There's hope. I have this slide about just how regulation works and doesn't work in Connecticut. We do have in state statute that a pesticide advisory committee should be meeting that involves the heads of the different agencies, and that has not met in 30 years. The pesticide department at DEEP has had its funding cut a lot. If you look at this bar graph I have here, you can see the number of NOVs, that's notice of violation. So when our pesticide laws that we do have in place, when there are violations, it's up to DEEP's enforcement arm to go out and address that and, issue consent orders or make people pay fines. And you can just see as the staff has been cut from 14 people in 2003 to 5 people in 2017, which is the latest data that we have. Enforcement actions fell from 173 to 3 during that time. So we're not really even doing a very good job of enforcing the pesticide laws that we have on the books. Meanwhile, if you're a licensed pesticide applicator in the state and you want to use a pesticide on someone's lawn, you have to file an application to be able to use it, and you have to pay. So we know that the state brings in around $3 million a year through these pesticide applications and registrations, but that money just goes into Connecticut General Fund and is not in any way earmarked to address some of the problems we're seeing, like with enforcement. So one of the things that seems obvious to me is to change that, but I don't know how hard that is. That seems to be hard, maybe too hard. But it's not as if there should be funding to make some of the improvements that we see that we need and to protect the environment from these chemicals. Our Connecticut Pesticide Reform Group has tried unsuccessfully for the last 3 years to pass a bill restricting non-agricultural uses of neonics. So in other words, on lawns, gardens, and golf courses. So just aesthetic uses, not even addressing agricultural use. But the good news, we are seeing local action. Stamford and Norwalk have both passed ordinances banning pesticide use on municipal property. And we want more towns and more cities to do that, because that is really a good way to put pressure on Hartford to act. I don't know. I have lots of information here about what you can do with alternatives, but I feel like I'm going to go over if I'm going to go through these really quickly. If you have a lawn service, switching to an organic lawn service is a good way to do this. Is a good way to, just make the switch, just go organic. If you do have a problem with grubs, there's a bioinsecticide called Grub Gone that is supposed to be safe, and you could try that. But it does seem that keeping your lawn from being too wet and aerating it, these are just ways to keep it healthy and natural, and that you shouldn't really have too big of a problem with grubs. A healthy lawn doesn't usually have huge grub problems. Invasives, you can use vinegar, wood chips. That's another talk. I'm not going to spend time on that. Ticks, I will spend a minute on, because it's such a important problem in Connecticut. But there are important studies, Connecticut studies, that show that spraying pesticides in your yard to kill ticks is not effective at reducing disease. So we're not solving the problem that way. better to spray yourself, check yourself, landscape your yard to repel ticks naturally as best you can, like removing barberry. This picture here, this is a plant that the white-footed mouse and the tick love. It keeps the moisture that the ticks need around the roots, and it's just a perfect habitat. And there's Connecticut studies that link barberry to greater and more active tick populations. There's a new product called Tick Kills that is shown to not harm pollinators if directions are followed. That it was tested in Newtown, Woodbury, and Goshen, and found to be effective. So there are alternatives for treating ticks if you feel like you need to do some kind of treatment in your yard. And I can answer questions about that if people have them. I'm just going to kind of fly through some of these. Mosquitoes also, a health concern, but it's really pretty well accepted science that spraying the flying mosquitoes is not the best way to kill them. The best way to kill them, using harsh chemicals to do that kill everything else, is also a terrible idea. And that's usually what most mosquito sprays are. They're permethrin, which is made from chrysanthemums, but is still extremely toxic. The best way to treat mosquito problems is to treat the larvae in standing water. And I cannot recommend highly enough if you're worried about this issue, going to the Xerces Society website and looking. They have a great plan for addressing mosquito problems in a way that doesn't hurt invertebrates and bugs and butterflies and everybody. So this is what we're working towards: organic lawn care for our farms, yards, and public spaces. Instead of seeing these yellow signs, we want to see the pollinator pathway, no pesticide sign. And in that process, we need to sort of begin, I think, to accept a kind of a wilder look. This is, it's gaining traction, this evolution of what's beautiful. It's definitely happened for me. This is my house in the bottom right corner that was in Connecticut Magazine with this article, The Incredible Shrinking Lawn. And that is my no mow May lawn. I did mow it after that, but we let the grass grow at the beginning of the season when the first pollinators are coming out, and there's not a lot of flowering plants for them. And so we let all the little flowering plants in the lawn grow. But this picture on the left is from the Wall Street Journal. So, Scientific American, CNN, lots of attention being paid to sort of the wilder look. And less lawn, more flowers is what the pollinator pathway is really all about. The payoffs will come in human health benefits, and also they will come in what you see when you go outside of your house. The birds that are nesting there and watching these, bumblebees, and I love these little syrphid flies. So I just have a recap. What can you do? Reduce your lawn, join the pollinator pathway, put out a sign saying you're pesticide free, letting your neighbors know, buy organic food, let your legislators know that you support pesticide reform targeting neonics this year in Connecticut. This is going to happen this year. So we're really working hard to make this happen, and we really need support from people across the state. So that is the most important thing. We have a fundraiser right now. We're raising money to do testing of Connecticut rivers for neonics. We want to add to the USGS tests that we have. So we just started this. I just put it up here in case anybody is interested. You can you can find it at the CPR Facebook page as well, or you can use this QR code here. Or you can email me and ask me more questions and ask me about it. I'm at info@norocriver.org. And
Excellent.
That's it.
Excellent.
I
Thank
didn't
you.
go on too long.
Yes. Can you hear me? Is my mic working?
Yes, you are working. I'm glad you're back.
Yes, yes. I was only gone for a few minutes, but I apologize for disappearing. The heat and somewhat crashed my computer here, but I was able to catch the entire presentation. So much information. Thank you, Louise. I mean, I've learned things just listening, especially about the coated seeds, the organic food. I mean, these invisible things that are dangerous to us and our our wildlife and our ecosystem. So thank you for bringing this wonderful information to our members and to Connecticut today. I do see three questions here. We have a couple minutes. Let me just pull up the questions here. It says there's a law in Connecticut that allows anyone to be notified that the abutting neighbor will be applying pesticides beforehand. Anyone can be listed on this registry by contacting Deep Pesticide Management Division. You must register by December 31st to be added to the registry each year for the following year. So that was something I was unaware of. So it seems like this
Yeah.
you were
In fact,
thinking.
I live next door to Gray Barns in, I don't know if anybody, I'm in Norwalk, and there's a inn and restaurant next to me, and it's beautiful, but they use more pesticides than I have ever seen, and we are literally right on the Silvermine River. So I just signed up to have those calls, and I'm alerted every time someone comes. So I have this long list of what they're using. I haven't figured out. I'm trying to talk to them. It's a tough thing, but it is important to know what's happening around you,
Absolutely.
so that we have that law.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nan, for that question. Patty has a question here. She says, a next door neighbor has bifin sprayed for mosquitoes and ticks, has had Lyme numerous times, and will have a granular treatment of horse powder, which includes Triclopyr, spread on the lawn tomorrow. There's no buffer between our properties. No matter what I say, this neighbor does not understand. There's just a split rail fence between our properties. Our homes are very close. I've been adding many native plants, habitats to my property. How can I protect my property from these pesticides?
I have the same problem. And I honestly, this inn next to me changed ownership about 5 years ago. And I mean, I know this is just hearsay, but I have just seen a decline in butterflies and wildlife since they started using all this stuff. So I feel your pain. I think that the best thing you can do is what you're probably already doing, which is planting a buffer between you and this neighbor. So planting shrubs, trees that can, catch any drift of pesticides coming over and can, stop any runoff of rainwater that might contain those lawn pesticides. Just like that picture I showed with the deep root system, if you have a vegetated buffer there, that is probably the best thing that you can do. And I do think putting a habitat sign like a pollinator pathway sign or a monarch way station sign or something, just to let people know they walk by, they have to, people may have to see things like so many times to think, oh, maybe, maybe I don't want to use these pesticides. Um, yeah, just doing the right thing yourself, setting the example is
Right.
important.
Excellent. Some good suggestions there. Thank you. Patty also has a question. Is there anything that can be done about the spraying across the state of Connecticut for mosquitoes because of EE?
I just have been reading about that. And they're doing it in New York too. Um, I don't know the answer to that. That it's so very frustrating, and I don't know enough about the threat of EEE. I just don't know enough about that. I think when there is a public health emergency like that, everything is put aside, and then it's just dealt with. We'll probably learn more after this has happened, and I don't have a good answer to that. I'm alarmed by reading about it as well.
Yeah, something new. I caught those articles as well too. So
Yeah.
some great questions. That was the end of our questions here. So again, Luis, I just want to thank you. I want to thank Pollinator Pathways for the partnership today to bring this educational webinar. I also want to thank again our Community Foundation at Eastern Connecticut, our today's webinar sponsor. And I certainly want to thank our board members that have joined us for Connecticut for Animals. Because of them and their vision, we're here today and making changes, and we're coming together for animals. So with that, Mary or Louise, if you have anything, I say Mary, we didn't have to have Mary join us, but thank you for watching, Mary. I see you in the audience out there with your expertise. I've enjoyed the presentation today. Louise, any final thoughts here?
No, just thank you all for caring about this issue. Spending an hour of your time thinking about it tonight. It's not the most fun, cheerful topic, but I think it's really important. And I think in Connecticut, we can be a leader on this issue. We can make this change. I think we can restrict neonics. So join us. Email
Absolutely.
me if you want to get more involved. I'm at info@norwalkriver.org.
Excellent. Thank you again. And we will have this with this recording will be posted on our website. It will go on our YouTube channel. It will also go out emailed to our entire membership, the link as well. So if you want to look back on information, this will be available on our webpage. And I just want to say thanks for everyone for coming together for animals today. And lastly, just please share the education you learned today with your family, your friends, your neighbors. You learned everything about coated seeds, to buying organic, eating organic, and what we can do in our yards to be organic and not negatively impact these ecosystems, our pollinators, the insects, and like you said, the lower level of the food chain. That's where it all starts. And if we're impacting that negatively, it's going to have an upward negative effect. So let's all come together. Let's use what we learned today and share it. Thank you, everyone. We're going to sign off here. Thanks again, Louise, for joining us.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.